Okay, kia ora koutou katoa. Good afternoon. Look, I'll do a brief introduction, just headline a few announcements for the week, and then I'll open up for questions. But what we'll do this time is just make sure that we front end the COVID questions if we can for Dr. Bloomfield, and then we'll just move into more general if we can. The House sits again this week, meaning select committees are also once again in full swing. I'll be in the House on Tuesday and Wednesday as usual. As you would expect, our economic recovery from COVID-19 continues to be my focus this week. On Wednesday, I will be holding a virtual summit with Prime Minister Lee of Singapore to mark the one-year anniversary of the New Zealand-Singapore Enhanced Partnership. That partnership underpins cooperation in a range of areas. New Zealand's relationship with Singapore has been critical in recent months as we have worked closely to secure critical supplies such as COVID testing kits and PPE, and to ensure trade links remain open to the benefit of our exporters. On Wednesday evening, I will participate in a conference call of world leaders in the so-called Early Movers Initiative. It's a grouping of nations that by and large went hard and early to beat COVID-19 and are exchanging information on the best approaches to take as many, such as New Zealand, begin to de-escalate restrictions. The call is hosted by the Austrian Chancellor and includes leaders from Australia, Norway, Denmark and Israel, just to name a few. On Thursday, I will attend virtually the local and central government forum and undertake COVID recovery visits in the Wellington region. And on Friday, I'll be in the Hawke's Bay for further economic recovery related visits. Tourism New Zealand has just launched the Do Something New New Zealand campaign, encouraging Kiwis to see parts of the country they haven't been to before to help get our economy and tourism sector moving again. And I urge anyone who is in a position to do so to help our recovery and support our local tourism operators by booking a visit to our own incredible backyard. I'm still in the process of locking down my plans for the weekend, but I do intend as much as I'm able to get out and about and support our local economies as well. As signalled last week, Cabinet today discussed the Alert Level 2 settings and the pathway to move to Level 1 as soon as safely possible. Last week I said we would regularly adjust our settings at Level 2 to allow more activity to take place when the advice and data says it's safe. We want to get our economy moving quickly without losing the gains we have made to date. It takes about 2 weeks for changes in levels to start showing up in our cases, as we're all now familiar. So we can now be highly confident, more than 3 weeks after the shift to Level 3, that there are no new cases attributable to the more relaxed restrictions which we had as we stepped down into Level 3 and started moving beyond that. That is very good news and is counter to what many countries overseas have experienced as they loosen their restrictions, with many having seen spikes in cases. This is in large part to New Zealanders sticking to the rules at 3, maintaining physical distancing, ensuring we limited the activities most likely to spread the virus, and of course the ongoing role of our border controls and the quarantine at our border. On the basis of this good news though, Cabinet has decided we can now increase the size of all gatherings to 100 from 12 noon this Friday, 29 May. This means gatherings such as church services, weddings and funerals can now have 100 people present. There also no longer will be a need for funerals or tangihanga to pre-register via the Ministry of Health, as they had been previously doing to date. The move to 100 also allows community sport to operate more easily, and I understand sporting codes have been working on operational guidance with Sport New Zealand. Large-scale events like concerts will obviously still have those restrictions applied in terms of size, but the shift to 100-person maximum means many more gatherings will be able to occur from now on. These changes are good news for business and for those looking to plan larger gatherings. It's another step in renormalising of life as we continue to stamp out the virus. It is the government's view that we should also move as quickly as we safely can to Alert Level 1. On that basis, Cabinet will check in again on our settings on the 8th of June. And we've agreed that no later than the 22nd of June 4 weeks from today, we will consider then the move to alert level 1. The fact that we are even, and I should add, this is based on the advice of the Director General of Health who supported these recommendations and made these recommendations. The fact that we are even making these decisions shows the success we have had to date as a country in fighting the virus and highlights we can now make choices many others can't. In fact, the increase in gathering signs means we now have some of the most permissive settings of any of the countries we compare ourselves to, including Australia. Going hard and early has paid off for the economy, and now we need to just continue the level of vigilance that has got us here. We are still in a global pandemic. Cases continue to grow overseas, and we do still have people coming home, but for the most part, many aspects of life can and should feel much more normal. Let's not lose that advantage. However, no matter how fast we reopen our economy, there will continue to be tough times to come for many. Protecting New Zealanders from the economic hit of the virus is our priority, and we are investing in jobs and support to business to keep Kiwis in work. We're also investing in training to help people shift jobs too. But we know that there will be job losses, and for many, losing their job will be incredibly hard on them and their family financially. That is why today, as you're aware, we have announced enhanced financial support for New Zealanders who lose their job due to the virus. A full-time worker will receive $490 tax-free a week for 12 weeks to help cushion them through the initial period in which they lose their job. This will also add much-needed stimulus to the economy. Our team of 5 million stuck together to defeat the virus, and now we need to stick together to support those bearing the brunt of the virus's economic impact. I urge New Zealanders to be kind to each other in lockdown, and we now need to continue that support to one another during our economic response to the virus also. We're now happy to take your questions.
The decision to go from 10 to 100, was that on advice from the Ministry of Health that it should go to 100, or did you have to reach some sort of compromise where they said 150 and you're going down to 100?
Oh, I might as well let the Director General speak to his own advice.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Kia ora koutou and talofa lava. So the full group size in Alert Level 2 was always 100. We started off with 10. And we felt we were in a position to advise that we could go right to the full extent of Alert Level 2, which is a group size of 100, and that's the advice we gave.
Does this change the restrictions on hospitality outlets that you can only have groups of 10 and one server and that sort of thing?
So obviously the groups of 10 was always based around the social gatherings, and so now that limit has gone. But what we are still asking hospitality to do is continue to seat people, continue with all of that social distancing within their venues, but they can have larger group sizes now, because otherwise it would be inconsistent that you can have a large social gathering at home, but you can't take that social gathering into a hospitality space.
No dance floors?
At this stage, of course, we are still keeping the seating in those venues. And that is, of course, because with organised events like weddings and so on, much easier for us to keep a track of who's together. When you have a large number of strangers coming and going in those hospitality spaces, that becomes more difficult.
The apps for, though, to help us kind of keep track of who's on the Zoom and where they've been and when?
Yes, of course, it's not just about tracking, it's about risk mitigation as well. And I think that's one of the things just for us to continue to be mindful of. New Zealand is in a good space, but we still have to be mindful that when we look abroad, we are seeing countries that are still surging in their cases. We do still have New Zealanders coming home. They are being quarantined, but we also know that COVID's showing up in some tests for people 4 weeks after having had it. So we do still need to just keep managing that risk, but we are doing it in such a way that we are opening up as much of our economy as we can at the same time.
Nightclub owners and venue, you're going to have nightclub owners and venue owners really upset with this, another apparent inconsistency.
How so?
Because people will be able to go and dance and have parties at a wedding or in
Keeping in mind, the health advice still and guidance remains the same for even those who are having a wedding event as they are for those who might be going out for a night out in Courtney Place. All of that health guidance remains exactly the same. What I think we should also keep in mind is we are opening and have already opened our bars across the ditch. That's not even on the horizon. And in fact, we're saying that we will be reviewing in 4 weeks' time. That is a very, very distant prospect for many other countries. So we're moving faster than many, but doing so in a way that means that we keep these good results.
Kiwis
I'll come over, Henry.
Kiwis use the COVID-19 app to kind of register themselves as businesses if they're going to have a 99-person party?
We expect that people, when they're running their own events, are most likely to know who's attending them. What we are doing, though, is working with MB to make sure that people who don't have business numbers, for instance, churches, electorate offices, other venues, are able to access QR codes. So that's something that MB has been working on.
Government's decision
Yeah,
to
Henry, did you have a
What would your advice be to people who were planning to basically hold a party on Friday?
Yeah, keep a list of who you've invited. And you may send out an invite list via Facebook. There's lots of ways that you can keep track of that. So it is still really important that people keep those digital diaries. And for a wedding, that's obviously quite straightforward because you're sending out your invitations. But do just keep a log of who it is that's participating in your events. We still need to be able to contact trace.
In terms of the timeline to go on Friday, was that
I'll come to Jason in the front and then to you.
Was that specifically to cater for the church population and that have
Yeah.
been feeling a bit hard done by?
Well, two things. We need to give enough time for orders to be drafted and then notice around those orders. So, the option for Friday really was the earliest that we could do that. But we were mindful that actually there are services for those who come together for prayer for our Muslim community, our Jewish community, Seventh-day Adventists. So we were mindful of the different times at which our religious communities begin their congregation on Fridays. So that was in our thinking as well.
In terms of the timeline, you said Cabinet would consider no later than June 22nd their shift. What's the soonest you might consider it?
So as I've flagged, 8th of June, we're just checking in on settings because, of course, there are a range of settings that we have at level 2. Just checking that we feel like those are working consistently and that there's no adjustments that need to be made there. Of course, we need to keep in mind on what's happening with cases. The recommendation from the Ministry of Health is that then we would look at on the 22nd of June to a move then to level 1. But we are keeping our ability to keep a watch on how we're tracking in the meantime.
Just to follow up to that, does that mean that on June 22 you need to have provided a date for moving to level 1 by June 22? So on June 22 you could say by July 5 we go to level 1?
No, I'd be a bit more optimistic than that. Perhaps I could hand over to Dr. Bloomfield to give his thinking. But of course what we've said is we want to really clearly signpost the expectation of movement around alert levels. And we've done that so far, and that's what we're continuing to do here around the most likely time that we would see movement around alert level 1.
Thank you. So 2 comments. First of all, the reason why we felt able to advise to go from 10 to 100 to the full alert level 2 group size was because obviously we've just had the very low or 0 cases over this last week, and if you go back 3 weeks. So in effect, the outcome of our lockdown and the way that people supported that through alert levels 4 and 3 has paid huge dividends here. So we felt not only should we move to 100, but that we should spend then two-week periods in the full alert level 2 and then actively consider a possible move to alert level 1.
Yeah. So that's us signalling that if we continue on this track, if we continue to see these low number of cases or no cases, then we'll be in a position to look to move from that point. So that's what we're signalling today, and I hope that does give that level of certainty for planning as much as we're able to for those who are currently living with the restrictions that come with level 2.
Just
a question on the bubble. Can you be clear about this? Is the bubble conditional on Australia eliminating state border restrictions?
No, it's contingent on Australia signalling that they're ready. And so that will come with their own, I'm sure, their own conditions on what they think needs to be in place. Ultimately, it's a matter for them. They may choose to open up while they still have some internal border restrictions. They may choose to wait. I see that as a matter for Australia.
So do Australians who've lived and worked in New Zealand have to wait on that bubble before they can return, or are they allowed to return?
They can return, they're just subject to our quarantine. And so I imagine many will be waiting for a period where they wouldn't have to have a quarantine apply to them, which is the benefit of the Trans-Tasman bubble. Once we're in a position to apply that, then the quarantine wouldn't be part of that travel mix.
Because I know someone has 4 times tried to come back to New Zealand but has not been allowed. Are there appeal processes or anything they can do to get back?
That sounds curious to me. Happy to try and pick up any case that feels like it might be inconsistent. But what we do know, obviously we've had the situation where citizens and permanent residents obviously allowed to come home. There have been some who have been living here but don't hold that status who have been caught out offshore. That's a group that we're now working through how we look at having those individuals be able to reconnect with their family, their loved ones, their work, their home. So we do recognise there have been a group caught out there and that we do need to make sure that we're focused on how some exemptions would apply for them. They would still need to quarantine though until we're in a position where a bubble exists.
Dr. Bloomfield, do you consider with the low number of cases recently that eradication is now possible? And is there any work being done at the Ministry of Health around a precise definition of elimination that some public health experts have called for?
Well, on the latter question, yes, we've got a really clear description of what elimination is, and in fact we've elaborated this into a nice description. If it's not on our website already, we will make sure it's up there. But the thing about elimination is, again, it's there's still a pandemic out there, and we still have a very strong set of limitations and measures at the border that are part of an elimination strategy. So even if we're confident there's no transmission of disease inside the country, the possibility of it coming in, which is what we're very clear we're trying to avoid, means that we need to maintain an elimination approach, because if we do get a case, we need to be able to do we need to test, we need to be able to isolate and contact trace. So it's an ongoing elimination rather than a one-off eradication process.
Prime Minister, over the weekend we've been hearing reports of continuing confusion with the apps, and some businesses have actually, or in hospitality, have gotten rid of their contact tracing sheets because they think the government app replaces it. Is that part of the contact tracing system still up to standard in your view?
Yeah, so what we signalled when the contact tracing app that was developed by the Ministry of Health came in is that there would just be that period of transition, because what the Ministry is building in is the functionality that if you go into a hospitality venue, you scan in, we want the ability to, if you are found to have COVID, to then contact everyone else through an automated process to let them know that they need to take certain precautions. And that functionality is being built in, and that's where there's that little bit of overlap at the moment around recording for hospitality. So you still see that. Some are still continuing to use other apps like Ripple and so on, but we do see a situation in the not too distant future where we'll be able to consolidate right down. At the moment we've had over 360,000 who have downloaded the app. And one of the key things that it does do is make sure that the Ministry of Health then has their updated details. And even that is a huge improvement on what we've had in the past. And we've had, I think from memory, something like 13,000 businesses as well. But we continue to expect that to grow. Jackson, they'll come to you, Toba.
Just back on Trans-Tasman travel, just to be clear, you're saying that state border bans in Australia aren't a barrier to the resumption of travel between the two countries, because this morning you suggested that that was the case, that it was your belief that Australians would be able to travel.
So let me be really clear. It has got nothing, it's not a barrier for us, it's got nothing to do with us in terms of that decision making, it's ultimately a matter for Australia. So there's nothing on our end that means that would be problematic. It's ultimately over to Australia. I would anticipate that they probably want to resolve that movement issue first, but still, as I say, that's absolutely a matter for Australia.
There have been no discussions between New Zealand and Australian officials, or New Zealand officials and some state officials, about Trans-Tasman travel on a state-by-state basis?
There's been a reading of our borders, and that will, to a certain degree, will take at a state level. There's a role there at a state level because of, as I understand, the way that they'll be working there through their airports and so on. And so there will have been conversations, but again, that's not down to timetabling, it's just down to readiness. But I'll continue to stay in touch with Prime Minister Morrison. I anticipate catching up with him this week, just as we regularly do. But from our perspective, it's ultimately down to when both sides of the Tasman feel ready.
If you've had a chance to see Todd Muller's new...
Can I just continue to check that we've got COVID questions, and then I'm happy to come to you. I just want to make sure that I don't have Dr. Bloomfield standing here unnecessarily. Yeah, down the back.
Why release an app if it doesn't have the functionality to replace the existing contact tracing system?
Again, just coming back to that, one of those very simple, so there are multiple benefits that the app provides the Ministry of Health. Updated contact information is one of them. We'll continue to see rolling updates, one around that additional ability to contact other people who check into a similar venue, also around further work on Bluetooth. So there will continue to be improvements as we go. Yep, down the
Yeah,
back.
so just to come back to dance floors. So if you're in a private venue and you're having a wedding or something of like a private venue, you can have a dance floor or no dance floor at all.
Yeah.
And in a public setting, so bars can't have.
So
any dance
again, we're still continuing in those hospitality settings to have the requirements around seated, keeping in mind on any given evening the number of people who can be coming through a single venue can be significant. Whereas, of course, private venues, we continue to also have health guidelines for them around the way they behave in these singular events, but they are singular events. And so that's the distinctions that are being drawn there.
Bars could be hired out for a private event, which then could have
But
mingling.
has a single gathering of 100 people, as opposed to the fact that you could have 1,000 people coming through a bar at any given night that isn't for an event such as that.
Why is someone who loses their job because of COVID-19 paid so much
Can
more
I
money?
do you mind, Henry, if I just check if there's any more for Dr. Bloomfield, and then I'm happy to come to the income support payments. Yep.
Been pushing for Kiwis to stay home if there's even the slightest hint of sickness.
Yes.
And there's a lot of lack of job security around at the moment. Are you worried that they're not going to take that advice, or what's your advice to people?
Yeah, my hope would be, and you've seen some of the announcements we've made today, is that we're continuing to support people and allow them that if they need to take time to be well, that they will be able to do that, because we actually do want all New Zealanders, regardless of their circumstances, to be able to look after themselves and their community by staying home if they're sick. Joe?
It's not COVID.
Oh, okay, sorry, Gina?
Do you need to more permanently then look at increasing sick leave? We're pretty behind.
That's not something that's been raised as an issue to date. We'll continue to stay in touch with those representatives who might have a closer ear to the ground on whether that's becoming a limitation. Yeah. Anything else for Dr. Bloomfield? Okay, thank you, Dr. Bloomfield. Do you know, sorry, Trevor, I'll come back to you and then I'll come to you, Henry.
Thank you. If you've had a chance to see Todd Muller's new front bench that he outlined today, do you consider it a more or less formidable front bench?
Oh, I can't say or express an opinion either way, actually. Yes, I did see it briefly in the aftermath of Cabinet. And again, you know, I'll just repeat what I said this morning. It is no easy thing to rebuild a team after a coup. It is tough work, and I wish them well.
From your experience of opposition, does it become self-fulfilling after one successful coup to kind of turn off the tap of that revolving leadership contest that kicked in with the Labour Party?
Oh, I think that's ultimately, again, as someone, of course, who's had experience on both sides, I think one thing I've learned is not to dispense too much advice, particularly when my job is to get on with focusing on our economic recovery, and that's what I'm doing. I wish them well in their recovery as an opposition. Obviously, they're not the party of key and English now. They're having to rebuild, and I wish them all the best.
Prime Minister, why does someone who loses their job because of COVID-19 deserve more money than someone who lost their job because of some other reason?
I don't think that's how I would characterise it. I think what we need to acknowledge here is that when we have large-scale job loss, and we've had the same with the GFC, and we had the same with the Christchurch earthquake, there's acknowledgement that you have a large number of people who suddenly find themselves in an economic environment that is incredibly tough. What we're acknowledging is this has actually been an issue that's been raised in the future of work. Rather than continuing just to have this ongoing response in this way, I'd like us to think about what in the future will stop us having to put in these ad hoc responses. But this is the third time now that we've had to do something like this when there's been a large-scale shock to our system. And I think it's time we consider the longer-term framework.
The fact that the overall benefit levels could be great, doesn't that disappoint to the fact then that overall benefit levels are too low, as your own welfare expert advisory group told you?
Well, obviously this is short-term, and so acknowledging that this is short-term, firstly, acknowledging also that we've got a much larger group of people who are coming in at one time because it's an extraordinary event, and also that there are limitations for the eligibility. So it's not just income level, it's whether or not there are whole groups of people who will sit outside the system but equally will experience a significant shock and possibly lose their homes and so on. And what I'm arguing is that actually it is time for us to look at the longer term settings when we have previously plugged this gap 3 times before now.
Say to someone who lost their job in January because of some other reason, nothing to do with COVID, and has been struggling financially ever since on regular unemployment benefit.
Yeah.
They say coming in for someone who may say, why can't I get that money?
Yeah, and we have acknowledged again that this is a period that is a 1 in 100 year event, but it is going to trigger us to do work outside of this 1 in 100 year event, because I think it does highlight a gap that we have in our system. I'll come back to Jenna.
More long
And then Joe.
Yep. Wouldn't a more long-term solution just to be to raise benefits to a level that is livable?
I think when you look globally, we are one of the few countries that doesn't have any form of social insurance. And that points to, I think, a gap in our system that we have sporadically plugged in the GFC, in the Christchurch earthquakes, and now. And so that does make our system different to others. It has been looked at from time to time, but I think, the fact that we're back here again, I think does mean there's something to look to in the longer term. Sorry?
Sorry, just in terms of the redundancy limit of $30,000, why is that fair if someone's worked in their job for 16 years and get a payout of that much? How do you gauge?
Because I think equally if we'd not had that, you would ask whether or not it was fair for there to be a support for someone who had received a significant payout or indeed had access to an income at a certain amount. So I do think that, of course, there's always that balance between cushioning the blow for people who are in that situation, but also doing it in such a way that acknowledges that some will have a cushioning that they've had provided by their employer as well. Okay, Joe.
So will you give any consideration to campaigning on for just the party vote in the Northland seat?
Sorry, will we give any?
Will you give any consideration to campaigning for just the party vote in the Northland seat?
I've answered many times before that we haven't done that in the past, and I see no reason why we would in the future, and it's not a request I've had either.
Just to supplement, does it concern you at all to see the National Party under its new leadership leaving the door open to New Zealand First?
Oh, look, these ultimately are decisions that other parties will make. But we've always been a party that has run in electorates because, of course, we see that representation being really important for our Labour voters in different areas, and so that's something we've had for obviously a number of elections.
National open the door in terms of, I guess, just campaigning for the party vote in the Northland seat. Would you match that?
I think one of the things here is that I accept that we are moving into a phase where people will be quite focused on the election, but as I've said, that's not something we've done before, and my focus, yes, there will come a time when I will switch into that election mode. Right now, I need to run a government and an economic response to COVID. Ben, and then I'll come to Jackson.
Have you received any reports?
Oh, you've given up on yours? That's fine. Yeah, Ben?
Have you received... Are you guys done?
Yeah.
Have you received any advice of damage from this morning's earthquake? And on indulgence, I wonder, since you're based in Wellington at the moment, if it was Neve's first earthquake and how she fared?
I don't believe it was the first. I think we've had tremors before. Well, certainly Premier House tends to feel them quite acutely. As for damage, I had a report in from NEMA quite soon after, so sometimes it takes a little bit of time for us to get reports of damage. We have quite an automated service where people can tell us whether or not they felt it and the strength of it, so a large number obviously reported it, but I haven't as yet had reports of damage, but I'd expect that will take a little bit more time to come through.
You've been quite widely memed for your response this morning as it hit when you were live on TV. What was going through your head in that moment when you felt the room shaking and you had to still be on camera?
Are you serious? That was what was going through my head. That's not me responding to your question. Yep.
Did you think about not cover and holding?
There, obviously, you can see right here where I was standing. I was standing on that second stair. There's not a lot to drop, cover and hold under in that precise spot, in fact, in this room. But what I was also mindful of is that it's not always easy to get a real sense of the magnitude of an earthquake in here because of the base isolators. You can tend to move a little bit more than the quake implies in terms of strength. So, yeah.
The National Disaster Fund is essentially empty now for the first time in decades. The second there's another large earthquake, the Crown Guarantee will automatically be called on. Does that concern you? That would be a massive shock to the government's books, which are already under pressure.
Yeah, and again, we always look at our economic management, our financial positioning with an eye to being the shaky isles, and that's why I think going even into this global pandemic, you see that our debt levels relative to GDP, when you compare us to the rest of the world, were very, very low, because we always manage our books with that in the back of our minds, and that has served us well. And I think you see from the ratings agency that that has served us well.
Did New Zealand consider joining the call from its Five Eyes partners, Canada, the UK and Australia, to condemn China's actions with regard to Hong Kong? I know we issued a statement this weekend, but it was a separate statement.
Yeah, and look, you know, ultimately, you said the Five Eyes, obviously it was, my recollection was it was Canada, Australia and the UK. The US made a statement, we made a statement. Not everything is always done under that Five Eye banner. Sometimes it'll merely be a matter of sequencing different working hours. But the Deputy Prime Minister, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, did put out a statement. He acknowledged the concerns that New Zealand had, and very similar to some of the statements you've seen from other partners.
That statement was much more critical of China and much more sort of on the nose. Our one was somewhat more circumspect. Do you still endorse the spirit of their statement?
I didn't. I wouldn't have considered it circumspect at all. I thought it was very plain speaking. I think the Deputy Prime Minister rightly set out on behalf of New Zealand that there were concerns around amendments based on national security that weren't involving those from within Hong Kong. So that doesn't undermine our position, which is in support of a two systems policy, but we were concerned about whether or not this policy is challenging to that. Yeah, I'll come to you, Jacinda.
Prime Minister, earlier on you compared our restrictions, or New Zealand's restrictions, to Australia, suggesting that New Zealand is now better placed than Australia in terms of having fewer restrictions in place. Do you believe that is the case, and is it because of how harsh the initial lockdown restrictions were here as opposed to in Australia?
We've always had, and look, you know, really that's just an acknowledgement of this place and time, the relative comparison to where we are. But we have had a policy of go hard, go early. And the benefit of that is that now we see ourselves in a position to be able to come out, yes, with factoring in risk, but actually coming out in a way that opens up our economy more quickly than we otherwise might be able to. Yep.
What did you make of the management?
And then I'll come down the back. This is the last view.
What did you make of the management buyout of Stuff Limited today? Does that make it more politically palatable for the government to come to the table in terms of supporting them?
It's always been important to us to make sure that we have a strong media sector. It's in the interests of democracy. So from our perspective, I think what we've seen today, both with MediaWorks and with Stuff, is actually underscores why we need to continue the work that we're doing on supporting the sector and supporting local journalism.
Labor's confidence in supply agreement with the Greens commits to overhauling the welfare system. Do you believe that you've adequately delivered on that?
Well, we have made significant changes, and you know, I think it's only right that in the context of that question, I reflect on the fact that in our first 100 days, we saw a $5.5 billion investment in things like the family tax credit, establishing the winter energy payment, and since then, changes like indexing benefits to wages over time will have a considerable impact on income adequacy for those who are on government support. Couple that with the doubling of the winter energy payment to cushion the blow of COVID, and the fact that we have continued to signal that we will keep moving, but we'll do it in such a way that is sustainable, that we don't see a loss of those changes. And it will make a big difference, and already is, to those who have been on government support.
If a decision isn't made on finding a delivery partner for the light rail Auckland system before the election, will Labor campaign on delivering the light rail in its next term?
Yeah, our focus on getting Auckland moving has not changed. Our focus on transport from the city to the airport has not changed. But of course, I'll wait until I have cabinet decisions to speak in any more detail on that.
Just on the $3 billion infrastructure fund, what kind of assurances can you give that it's not just going to all be grey infrastructure, I guess, roads, asphalt, or, because there's some concern that green infrastructure is going to be bypassed in the rush to get shovel-ready projects on the ground?
Well, first of all, I would look to the budget, which had an absolute focus on jobs, jobs. And with that focus, we were looking at ways that we could solve challenges we already had. We already had challenges in housing, so we're funding 8,000 new public houses. We already had challenges with the issue of income adequacy and food security, so we expanded food in schools, which creates 2,000 jobs. We had issues with the cleanliness and ongoing degradation of our waterways, so we're funding fencing and restoration of wetlands and also predator control. You know, this is where we have used COVID as an opportunity to boost funding for areas that will make a material difference to our environment going forward. On infrastructure, I'd say that actually, when it comes to the way that we will focus on infrastructure, you already saw in the upgrade program the way that we've balanced finding those shovel-ready projects, but also future-proofing them. And a number of those projects, which improve our public transport offering and, for instance, double laning and bringing in the ability for cycle and walkways, we actually already identified. So that's been a big part of what we already had in the $12 billion upgrade.
Minister, now that Parliament is back and select committees are back, have the epidemic response committees finished?
Well, what I have signalled previously is that was a committee for a period where we weren't able to sit, when we didn't have select committees, when there wasn't a question time. Now we have business as usual, but ultimately I leave that to the Leader of the House to deal with that side of business.
This week, or
I don't I don't see the role that it needs to play now that Parliament is back to normal, and we do want to make sure that other opposition members on other select committees are having a voice on the COVID response, and they will have the chance to question through the estimates process through other select committees. But ultimately, that is for the Leader of the House to deal with what happens with the Epidemic Response Committee from here.
Minister, the opposition leader has been criticised by some minority groups, including some vital partners in the post-March 15 community strengthening for displaying a Make America Great Again hat in his office. So my question is, do you consider a MAGA hat to be a symbol of oppression?
Do you know, it's not for me to determine how other people feel around different symbols or memorabilia. I can't determine how those things make other people feel. I think ultimately, though, as politicians, we're judged on our record, and that's what we campaign on. It's what people look to when they make a determination of whether they support us or not. And I'm very happy to stand on the record that we have as a government over this past 3 years. Okay, thank you, everyone.